It is a fundamental fact. Men are different from women. Women are weaker. Well, they're gentler. Those are the words of Marcus Daly, as played by David Hemmings in Dario Argento's classic 1975 giallo, Deep Red. I am the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the Italian Horror Guy podcast. There is a distinct sense of uncertainty around the status of masculinity in Deep Red, Dario Argento's greatest film. This threat manifests itself through various women throughout this film in relation to our main protagonist, Mark. Women jostle for social power and significance throughout the film, a trend started early, as one is dispatched very early in the film. From this point, males with questionable masculinity and females with some degree of power drive the film forward. Masculinity is problematized through the use of a homosexual character, Carlo, with the implication that his sexual preference is a marker of effeminacy, while his relationship with his mother is emasculating. His homoerotic relationship with Mark has a similar effect. The film also utilizes Mark to create an uncertain state of masculinity as he attempts to track down a killer who is threatening his life. His determination to catch the killer before his female friend Gianna presents him in a position of uncertainty as he attempts to impose a masculine authority that he seems to be lacking. As the threat to his life grows stronger, his stubbornness and unwillingness to let a female assist him almost leads to his death on multiple occasions, something that exposes his need for the assistance of his female friend. This assistance is challenging to the masculine order, as her physical aid, often through the use of violence, resembles a more resembles a role, more traditionally associated with masculinity. Finally, I will discuss the breaking of gender norms through the use of the female killer before moving into a discussion around the music and the fantastical nature in the film. The female killer's punishment, which is violent, very violent, finally leaves the world in a state of chaos in conjunction with the music. Deep Red brings the early Argento giallo cycle to its natural conclusion. In his Animal trilogy, there was a sense that society was moving towards something new and different, but in Deep Red, it seems we are finally there. One senses that neither Mark nor Argento are entirely comfortable in this new environment. Argento makes use of a woman to challenge masculine power in the very first scene of Deep Red, foreshadowing the crisis of masculinity that is a central theme of the film, in which the assumed authority of men comes into question. Lithuanian psychic Helga Ullmann speaks in a forum set up to explain her psychic powers. She tells a man who has apparently never seen her before that he is clutching keys, one of them very large. The description is almost phallic, the large key representing the man's masculinity, or even that of all the men who have attended the forum. The man himself is stunned. Helga is almost immediately punished for this, however. She has a vision which causes her to panic, which she describes as something strange and sharp, like the prick of a thorn. Just as Helga figuratively castrated the male-dominated audience in the forum, this thorn puts her back in her place, so to speak. The thorn is not enough, and she is eventually murdered with a meat cleaver. Her true punishment needed to be inflicted through the use of the larger and real handheld phallic weapon. The choice of the meat cleaver as a weapon suggests that she has been turned into meat, the ultimate punishment for her transgression, and this dismemberment reestablishes the female in a passive, non-threatening form. Now, I grant you, this is all sounding particularly progressive, at least in the sense that you might assume Argento approves of this challenge, but this is not necessarily the case. Throughout Deep Red, there are many moments that seem to be consciously included to show men and women jostling for control in the world. Argento has noticed something in society and is trying to work it out. But this is no simple anti-men, pro-women film. Argento is too interesting for such simplicity. As Helga is being murdered, the relationship between Mark and Carlo is introduced. An apparently drunk Carlo, who seems to live a sad life, indicates that he wants a girlfriend, referring to a piano as a beautiful woman. The pair then hear Helga scream, which Carlo disrespectfully dismisses, mocking the idea of a virgin being raped. This attitude could be seen as a marker of misogynist heterosexual masculinity, but Carlo's interactions with Mark indicate otherwise. The pair seem to share something of a homoerotic relationship, according to Mackenzie. They engage in a muffled and confusing conversation, which could suggest the ambiguous sexuality of the characters, especially considering it takes place in front of an almost completely nude male statue. It becomes clear that the males in this film are not traditionally masculine. They are artists, after all, like most of Argento's protagonists. Carlo's troubling attitudes towards women could therefore be due to him being uncomfortable with his sexuality, as he is later embarrassed when Mark finds out that he has a boyfriend. He appears to hate himself for being homosexual. As Mark and Carlo engage in various acts of homoeroticism, such as the exchanging of cigarettes, conversations in front of nude statues, and playing a piano together, there is an implication that Mark could also be homosexual. Both characters fail to assert themselves over women as the film progresses, both when a woman is blatantly evil, in the case of Carlo's mother, or when rightly being challenged, such as when Mark is rude to Gianna. Mark is not a man's man per se, but he is still heroic in a way we might associate with generic traditional masculinity. Soon after Carlo's disrespectful comments, Mark sees Helga being attacked in her hotel room. She is a distance away, both her hands on a window, facing Mark and screaming. She is a damsel in distress, to be certain. With that thought, Mark runs towards the danger. He arrives at her building and rushes upstairs. He is the hero, but he is a little late. Mark comes to a hallway full of artistic faces. The camera does not focus on any of the faces, but there are many on the wall. Mark is in a rush. This is a panicked and chaotic situation. The coming confusion is bearing down on Mark. The faces are haunting and aggressive, but lifeless and androgynous. Argento is giving us a clue. In the chaos, Mark sees the killer's face, but fails to realize. He soon finds Helga, but she has passed away, her neck resting on a broken window with many large shards of glass causing a thick stream of blood. This is the violence against women you were warned about in Argento's work. This is more violent than we have seen in his previous gialli. It is more difficult to look at, but look we must. One of Helga's breasts is exposed as Mark removes her body from the window. The viewer cannot help but read all this from a gendered perspective. Mark sees the killer walk away in a trench coat past the still drinking Carlo. The assumption for now is that the killer is male. Gianna seems to exist to turn Mark into a better person. He is no monster, as has just been established, but he needs some guidance. Gianna first appears as a journalist at the scene of Helga's murder. Due to her profession, she is able to play an active role in uncovering the killer's identity. One investigator tells her she is unwanted and that police are conducting a very complex investigation. This is no place for her. Mark is happy to interact with her at first. They strike up an odd sort of friendship in an attempt to find the murderer. However, Mark's masculinity becomes too threatened for it to ever work properly, as he is conscious of not becoming a reactive force in the relationship, according to Maitland McDonough. After telling Gianna that women are weaker and gentler than men, Mark loses to her in a game of Indian wrestling and overreacts, petulantly calling her a cheat and yelling at her. Whilst Gianna is rightly insulted by Mark's admittedly unnecessary comment about women, she does serve the purpose of orienting him towards open-mindedness, even if this takes a while. Sam Dalmas in The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Argento's first giallo film from 1970, my apologies, is just as likable as Mark, but he also largely conducted his investigation by himself, almost completely ignoring his partner Julia. In the deep red world, the men know deep down that they need female help. That likely explains Mark's petulance. So, with his masculinity under threat, Mark then insists that he conduct the investigation by himself, only to change his mind when the murderer appears at his apartment. Panicked and fearing for his life, he immediately calls Gianna. She manages to calm him down, and the murderer leaves through fear of being caught. But the unthinkable has happened. Mark has been saved by a woman. Gianna, having previously been mocked and silenced as she attempted to contribute information to the investigation, has now shown her worth. Gianna then saves Mark again when he is struck down from behind, presumably by the person he is attempting to find, after he discovers a dead body in a house linked to the investigation. Both of these scenes we'll be going into in further detail later in the podcast. After being left for dead in the house, he wakes up to the sight of Gianna. There is a brief moment when it appears she is in fact the murderer, before it is revealed that she merely followed Mark in order to make sure he was all right, should anything go wrong. Mark's independence and superiority has been overshadowed by Gianna now on multiple occasions. But Mark is able to grow. Deep Red is not merely about what awful people men are. The protagonists are constantly negotiating the world and each other. By the time Mark and Gianna go to the Da Vinci School to find out who drew the picture that will lead them to the murderer, Mark has realized he is not superior to Gianna. He seems to have accepted that Gianna can be of use, but neither is certain how to act in response to this realization. Despite their slightly ambiguous romantic attraction, as they walk down the hallway of the school, they mainly stare forwards and occasionally catch each other's eyes, but before awkwardly looking away. Certainly for Mark, it would seem he no longer knows his place in this relationship, having lost his strange sense of superiority. He is now accepting of the usefulness of Gianna, but he seems a touch unsure of himself. Argento may create a sense of confusion around gender roles, but he is not attempting to subvert them entirely. When Gianna hears a strange noise and goes off to investigate, Mark assumes she can protect herself. In hindsight, it seems ludicrous the pair would have separated under such circumstances. Mark feels safer with Gianna around. She has saved his life twice after all, but he has no role now. As Mark continues to search for the name of the child who drew the picture, Gianna gets stabbed. Should Mark have protected her? Should he have prevented her joining him at all? Perhaps. But once again, Argento knows the world is not black and white. He is not demonstrating a conservative or progressive standpoint exactly. Gianna is a brave and capable woman, but Mark should not avoid his responsibilities as a man. This is not some simplistic kind of men, bad women, good story, as we've already established. The final revelation, of course, proves this definitively. So after all this, Carlo's supposedly senile old mother, Marta, turns out to be the killer. A flashback shows her husband's attempt to put her in a mental institution, which compels her to stab him to death. This is a scene very reminiscent of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, and this seems to be no coincidence. Marta seems to be as unhinged as Norman Bates himself. Earlier in the film, Mark's meetings with Marta had been seemingly pointless and largely frustrating ordeals. On each occasion they met before Marta's true identity is revealed, she appears to be a forgetful and lonely old lady who is grateful for Mark's company. We have no reason to suspect her. The characters and audience are compelled to think the threat is male. The police even describe the killer as a man in a brown raincoat. Even the men in the film we like, Mark and Carlo, are highly flawed. We are oriented towards the idea that male aggression is the key factor here. Mark finds the picture was drawn by Carlo, which supposedly reveals him to be the killer. Men are bad, men are murderers. This is basically from the Modern Feminist Handbook, but all is not as it seems. Argento understands what we expect to see in a male killer. Marta's performance when playing this role is very masculine. She wears dark clothes, and her trench coat, black shoes, gloves, and hat imply she is male. Mark's assumptions that these items are inherently male proves to be detrimental to his investigation, but they also reveal something about how he sees the world. Throughout the film, he has been learning to respect Gianna and to accept her help. But we should remember that Mark thinks women are gentler and weaker. It is no accident the killer is the gentlest, weakest woman we have come across throughout the film. After Carlo is killed, Mark wanders back to the same place as their earlier conversation. He walks slowly. There is a cut on his forehead. He is intact, but defeated by the ordeal. The camera follows him and then lifts and zooms out. Mark remembers Carlo cannot be the killer. The two of them were together when the first murder took place. No, it's impossible, he says to himself. He was with me when Helga was killed. He had nothing to do with it. What ensues is the genius of Argento. Not that he tricked us, or that we are about to, or that we are about to see an excellent twist, but that the revelation turns everything on its head. Mark returns to the scene of the crime and walks through the hallway of faces, just as he did at the start of the film. The faces are terrifying, almost zombies. Their eyes are blank. Their gender is unclear. They are an uncomfortable mixture of meek and menacing. They make us uncomfortable. Mark realizes his mistake. He saw the face of the killer in the mirror. What an idiot. But Mark is more idiotic than even he realizes. Why did he not recognize Marta's face when he met her, or at least remembered after everything? Until looking into the mirror, both figuratively and metaphorically, Mark is unable to truly grow. Throughout the film, his respect for Gianna grows, but perhaps he still sees women as gentle and weak. Mark literally looks at himself in the mirror, but again, this film is no feminist dream. Mark turns around and notices Marta has followed him. She is dressed in her trench coat and hat, with a meat cleaver in hand, very appropriately. She is indeed a terrifying sight. Marta is the embodiment of Mark's new understanding of the world. However, Marta's supposed power is defeated almost the moment it is revealed. The death of Carlo seems to have caused a reemergence of her more feminine qualities. She is suddenly clumsy, missing in her attempt to cleave Mark before getting her necklace caught in an elevator. Mark thinks quickly, turning the elevator on, which pulls Marta's necklace through her neck, decapitating her. She is killed by a physical marker of her femininity. The camera dwells on a close-up of her dead face, with the makeup and striking lipstick brought further into focus by her similarly coloured blood. Maybe Mark is simply lucky in this scene, and his perception of the world is now altered. Importantly, the female killer has now been eliminated, but all is not returned to normal. The final image of the film is Mark staring into the red blood of his surprise killer in an upside-down reflection. The shot suggests Mark does not see this as a restoration of the norm, but in fact as a confirmation of his previous conception of the world was false. Thus, Argento has reimagined the world. It is not a total subversion, but Mark has grown. He is initially presented as a man with troubling attitudes towards women, but eventually accepts Gianna can assist him in uncovering the secret. But it is only when he discovers that the killer was a female that he truly realizes the world is not what he believed it to be. Like always, Argento's Gialli are pulling the world in many directions. This is an evolving world. Women are more autonomous, but this is no simplistic victimizer narrative. Marta is most brutal to women, whether it be cutting them up or drowning them, and she is the ultimate evil in this film. This does not imply that women are the ultimate evil, but perhaps that enough nuance exists in Argento's world so we can either claim he is anti-women or ultra-progressive. The personal affront Mark feels for not being able to protect a woman poses a threat to his masculinity that he can never quite overcome. This threat is highlighted in many different ways, as his homoerotic relationship with Carlo, as well as his relationship with Gianna, both evoke the idea of emasculation. At very least, Mark cannot be considered traditionally masculine, as his job as a pianist rather than an engineer, and inability to protect himself from physical danger subvert traditional ideas of masculinity. The homosexual and pseudo-misogynistic Carlo also suffers as his attempts to establish himself as a traditional male and is completely undermined by the revelation that his mother Marta has in fact been committing the murders herself. Gianna has still overturned Mark's perception of his own superiority, and while Marta is killed by a marker of her femininity, her necklace, Mark's shock at her being the murderer, having assumed she was male, presents a final and definitive blow to his understanding of his place in the world. The use of the female killer is an ongoing theme in Argento's work. As mentioned earlier, his film The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, the killer is actually a rape victim who sees a violent painting and identifies with the attacker rather than the victim. Argento's early philosophy has now come full circle. While Deep Red might not represent an ultra-progressive political stance or a significant shift from his first three gialli, it does represent an evolution in Argento's work. The slow, considered, even melancholy atmosphere of his early gialli have been replaced by a more high-octane and fantastical atmosphere. Put simply, there could be no Suspiria without Deep Red. In the second half of this podcast, we're going to explore it from a more aesthetic, or we're going to explore Deep Red from a more aesthetic, musical, and artistic perspective. We'll go over some of the scenes again, but hopefully we'll get an even deeper understanding of the film. The shift in tone is instant. In the very opening credits, Goblin's iconic progressive rock shifts Argento into a different world. The synthesized keyboard sounds are immediate and speedily paced. The tune is interrupted briefly, and we are witness in part to a murder. An ominous lullaby plays as we see a pleasant-looking living room from a camera seemingly placed on the floor. There is a Christmas tree there is a Christmas tree in the corner, but shadows on the wall, and a loud scream inform us a murder is taking place. The bloodied knife drops to the floor, and at the feet of what seems to be a child. The credits come back, and a more guitar-heavy section of the Goblin theme returns. What on earth is unfolding? With that, Argento has established a different world than he has previously. Notwithstanding some questionable science, his previous gialli are fairly grounded. Morricone's beautiful scores guided the tone of those films, but Goblin set the tone entirely in Deep Red. This world is also confusing, but it is hyper-aggressive and hyper-violent. It is more in line with how Argento is imagined in the horror zeitgeist. As we have seen previously in Argento's giallo films, artistry is central to events. Mark is a pianist, and he is depicted engaging more often with his art than Sam Dalmas. Giordani from Cat and Nine Tails, or Roberto from Four Flies on Grey Velvet. But in Deep Red, art is transformative, taking things from the grounded to the almost supernatural. Art is the state of the world, but also to be feared. Perhaps a metaphor for Argento's work itself. Mark endures one such moment. He is depicted in a brief scene with Carlo playing some upbeat and speedy piano at a fancy bar. The pair share a few scenes together, and this is by far the happiest. Engaging in their art form of choice together is a happy, upbeat time. Soon after this, Mark sits alone in his large apartment, writing a thoughtful, pensive little piano number. It perhaps reflects his aloneness. Either way, music increasingly comes to represent the mood of the film at any given time. Mark's tune is slow and considered, but the camera adds a certain intensity. We see lots of close-ups of his fingers, the music he is writing, and the piano keys. Mark hears a car outside, and there is a shift in the music with two dramatic, deeper piano notes. The mood is shifting. The camera scrolls across the music notes on the page quickly, and on their side, something is threatening and off. The music slows again, and we see more close ups of Mark's fingers and his piano. He keeps playing slowly. Someone walks above his roof, and plaster drops onto the piano. It needs to be noted here just how masterful this scene is in building the tension. It is the use of close-ups and ever so subtle alterations in the tone of an otherwise toned down piece of music just managed to steadily increase the heart rate. We see different angles of Mark's apartment, one particularly memorable as it takes us through a little tour of his space, eventually settling on a door that soon opens. It is a fairly large apartment, but the scene is claustrophobic. It feels like Mark could be attacked from any angle at any moment. This is Argento at his best. The scene is confusing but grounded until now. The haunting, distant lullaby begins. This melody seems to transform the film to the fantastical, almost like a portal. Mark stops playing and looks around. He gets up. There is a close-up shot of the vintage tape player playing the lullaby. It pans from the side and slowly on top, really showing us the function and appreciating the practicality of the artistry. Mark sits down again and keeps playing. A phone call breaks the unbearable tension to some extent. Mark answers the phone. "I don't know who you are, but you've got to help me." "Mark, it's Jana. It's me, Jana." Mark's face drops with some mixture of relief and regret. Despite being justifiably terrified, Mark's reaction is still significant in the overall context of his character transformation. He's already made a point to Gianna of women being weaker and gentler, and now that very much has saved his life. And now that very woman has saved his life. Indeed, once a transformative lullaby begins, the fantastical world of gender confusion begins. It is repeatedly suggested the killer is male, as mentioned earlier, but the eventual reveal, Marta, is, of course, the killer. The flashback scene reveals the lullaby as the theme to Marta's insanity. When this theme plays, the assumed social order is transformed. Women become threatening, and Mark's world is turned upside down. From this moment, the film shifts towards a slightly more Suspiria-esque feel. The very next scene shows Mark carrying a record, with the lullaby playing slightly more loudly than usual for non-diegetic music. We see a record player, which the camera zooms right in on, as well as the turntable needle. The events of the film now exist within the insanity of this lullaby, which Giordani describes as the leitmotif of the crimes. This leitmotif represents subversion, terror, and the fantastical. Bardi then says the following: "I'd like to add something much less scientific. If you recall, Helga also mentioned a house as well as a child singing. The modern ghosts and the black legends of today, the author spoke about a haunted house from which the neighbors could sometimes hear singing, like that of a child." Note that Bardi describes this as much less scientific. This story is designed to evoke a sense of the fantastical in the viewers. It is a classic haunted house story. At the end of the next scene, as Mark reads about this house in a library, there is a distant shot through a pillar, slowly zooming towards Mark, as a loud wind score can be heard. Some ghostly, distant yelling or even screaming sounds can be heard in the score. There is a mysticism to this scene. This feels like Suspiria. The lullaby moves the film into a different reality, and the main theme ups the ante in terms of violence. The author of the above-mentioned book is Amanda Righetti, who appears in one extremely memorable scene that feels like a fever dream. It is unbridled Argento violence. Suspenseful, yes, but with an inevitable outcome. Just before we are introduced to Amanda, the main goblin theme plays as we see a marble rolling along a table before the camera pans around a doll which has ropes tied around its neck. The terrifying childhood imagery is contained, Argento excess. We see is uncontained, Argento excess. We see a close up of an eye with excessive mascara, a major clue the killer might actually not be a traditional male figure. The camera turns the eye on its side, inducing a sense of insanity. Amanda's death itself evokes a sense of insanity and fantasy. She says goodbye to her friend Elvira. We see her house is relatively isolated, well outside the built up Turin setting of most of the film. In the library scene, we had a sense Mike was being watched, and the same sense is created by the zoom into the A. Rigetti sign on her fence. But unease immediately turns to terror. She walks inside and sees a doll hanging from the neck. She rushes back outside, but Elvira is already driving away. There is no ambiguity. Her life is under threat, and she is alone. Back in the house, we see a shot from down the hallway with the doll in the corner and Amanda through a door frame. The windy, fantastical music starts again. This creates a surreal atmosphere. The camera follows close behind as she checks room to room. The music gets louder, especially when we see one eye of the killer in the dark. A bird in a cage is in a panic. The music humming intensifies. The lights in the house are turned off. Amanda rushes to a door, but it is locked. We see a close-up of a cassette player, and the lullaby plays again. The house. The ghost of the house, says Amanda. The tension is palpable in this scene. We know she is going to die. The only question is how. In the past, the deaths in Argento's gialli were usually more clean in a sense. They were defined, by lengthy build-ups. But when there was blood, the kill was quick. If the kill was slow, there tended not to be blood. But the kills in Deep Red are more spectacular, almost a test run for Suspiria. They have an excessive and surrealist quality. A bird flies at Amanda, which she stabs mid-flight with a sewing needle. The bird dies, and another lands on the seat next to her. It cackles in an ominous, almost laughing manner. Some frantic music begins. Drums, piano, guitar. It is chaotic and messy, like the scene. As the killer finally appears behind Amanda, after this torturously long scene, the music seems to indicate a fast kill, but this is misleading. The chaotic, messy tune plays right through her excruciating murder. The killer strikes Amanda, who almost loses consciousness. We see a close-up of the killer's hand turning on boiling water, filling up a bath. Amanda's head is repeatedly dunked into the water, at one point desperately taking a breath. The viewer feels themselves struggling to breathe. It is an awful death made viscerally more awful as we see her face blister. When Giordani is murdered, the same music plays. The scene is shorter, but Argento again creates maximal discomfort in the viewers. The killer repeatedly slams Giordani's teeth into the corner of a mantelpiece. We have all bumped our teeth before. We all have been burnt by boiling water. Argento is almost punishing us. Giordani's death is complete with a knife through the back of his neck. The chaotic music continues as the camera moves towards his face and then moves back away. Uncomfortable, messy, chaotic. This is the new Argento. New Argento loves progressive music. Until writing this section of the podcast, I had always loved the scene when Mark searches the villa. I could never put my finger on why, though. It is very long, very ponderous, and unlike many such scenes you find in films, and like many such films that you find, many such scenes that you find in films occasionally, its length serves no practical purpose. The scene could be completed in a minute and the plot would lose nothing. But I finally worked it out. Mark is an artist. Deep Red is art. This scene just takes the opportunity to riff. In a way, it captures the contradictory spirit of Michelangelo and Antonioni's Blow Up, from which Argento seems to have derived significant inspiration, as well as David Hemmings. That film pokes fun at the impractical pointlessness of much of postmodern art, while simultaneously being an impractical, pointless story. In that sense, the David Hemmings character conducts a murder. So, in that case, the David Hemmings character conducts a murder investigation, but ends the film unsure if a murder even took place. I implore all of you listeners not to misconstrue me here. Blow Up is one of the greatest films ever made. In the case of Deep Red, the villa scene magnificently captures that sense of ponderous art, art for art's sake, we might say. Like in Blow Up, the David Hemmings character in Deep Red is taken less than completely seriously. The police investigator early in the film asks what his real job is after he reveals himself as a musician, and Marta is determined that he is an engineer pianist. Better than nothing, I suppose. It is fitting that when Mark gets his hands dirty, so to speak, and ventures out into the real dangerous world, it is done so with a musical, overly artsy background. Mark arrives at the villa with a word of warning from Olga, a red-headed, creepy child. There are ghosts in there. He looks around and gives a nervous sort of chuckle. This is a word of caution. It is not ominous exactly, just as the music that accompanies the scene is cautious and curious. We see a strange shot from the ground, looking up towards the top of the villa, and the music starts. At first it is entirely guitar. The camera explores the villa, showing its imposing size. The score is so similar to a section of Mike Oldfield's groundbreaking progressive instrumental rock album Tubular Bells that it might actually have been lifted from there and slowed down. For context, part of this album was used as the soundtrack for The Exorcist. A new world of horror indeed. But here it is more ponderous. There are quite a number of shots of Mark and the villa before he even opens the door. Some close, some far. The camera and the music seem to be feeling both Mark and the situation out. We see some shots above Mark, and one comes from behind and snakes around the stairs. The setup is curious. It is not exactly building tension. There is a reason why this film goes longer than 2 hours in its full-length cut. It gives us time to think, not keeping us on edge in every moment. Perhaps Mark needs this time to think as well. He initially struggles to open the door, perhaps jammed shut after years of non-use. When he does push through, the music gets more intense. We now hear occasional crash cymbals. It is quite loud. We simply cannot ignore the music as Mark moves around the large, empty, dark house. At one point, he steps on some broken glass and the music briefly cuts out. Then a curtain falls and the music continues. It is quite funny. Unlike most moments of humour in such films, there is no tension here. No villain is about to jump out and attack him. This is a marathon of emotions, not a sprint. Mark keeps wandering around the house, fairly aimlessly until it gets dark outside. We get the impression he is making very slow progress. This is an artist whose masculinity has been challenged. Perhaps he is not suited to the hands-on side of his life. The whole sequence is reminiscent of Blow Up. There is a lengthy scene in that film in which Thomas, also David Hemmings, slowly and meticulously pins all his pictures to the wall, trying to decipher some meaning, eventually believing he has photographed a murder. It is a significantly longer scene than the plot requires. But the film is more than just plot, as is Deep Red. In both, it seems the artist is trying to justify his existence. Thomas purely as an artist, Mark as an artist who feels emasculated. In Deep Red, we might speculate this scene does allow Mark some sense of masculine pride. He braves this uncertain, fantastical, haunted house, and his instincts are correct. The score so perfectly captures and creates the emotion of the scene, which is most appropriate because Mark and Argento are artists in search of understanding. Perhaps not self-assured, but art is not necessarily about that. As Mark nears discovery, the music is perfect. It becomes distant, almost an echo, and slows down to resemble a heartbeat. It is anticipatory, as if Mark is about to discover something both exciting and dangerous. Eventually, he notices a picture that was once on the wall has been slightly exposed. The main theme kicks in, and we witness a long scene of Mark picking away at the wall. It is genuinely incredible to think this scene could be so exciting. A man is scratching plaster off a wall, after all. But the film loves details, and our desire to solve puzzles kicks in. Argento grew this skill in his first three gialli, but he has mastered it here. The music intensifies as Mark picks up some glass and resumes scratching to reveal the picture. It is only interrupted as he enters the basement for more appropriate tools. The scene eventually ends. When Mark returns to the villa, the Argento transformation is now complete. To this moment in his giallo oeuvre, death was procedural for Argento. In this film, it is hyper stylized and hyper violent, but the reveal of the body in the villa moves Argento into the realm of the fantastical. Mark attempts to climb into a window from the outside. He slips, nearly falling off the building entirely. The music appears immediately. It is messy and slightly electric and reminds of the soundtrack, also composed by the Goblin members from Tenebrae, Argento's 1982 film. The score becomes frantic as Mark moves towards the ground. The heartbeat from earlier has been replaced by adrenaline. It is both dangerous and exciting. Mark is growing. By the time he approaches the wall inside, the music is electric. Then it turns into a drum solo to build the anticipation. The cymbals are clashing. Mark smashes through the wall with a pickaxe. The music is now all over the place. Guitar is added. Then some synthetic sounds that seem to have inspired the theme of Andrea Bianchi's wild zombie schlock film Burial Ground. Mark eventually sees the body. The music seems to become louder. It has replaced the haunting distant wind music from earlier and moved straight into unbridled shock. The house is haunted. Mark is knocked out by someone from behind. The prog rock has indeed progressed Argento right into a different world, a world in which Suspiria becomes possible. Mark wakes up in Gianna's arms, and there is a brief fake-out moment that insinuates she was responsible. There is a terrifying glow on her face, which turns out to be the reflection of the villa, which is now in flames. This is similar to the end of both Suspiria and Inferno. Both of these films end in flames as well, burning down the horrible place of fantasy, a cleansing perhaps. Nonetheless, this sets the scene for what Argento would then become. Procedure was to be replaced by fantasy. That seems to have happened mid-film. That this seems to have happened mid-film is a testament to Deep Red and to Argento. As mentioned earlier, the final image of this film represents growth for Mark, but it is a seismic shift for Argento. Mark stares at the blood and presumably dead body of his now vanquished foe. But he is a mere reflection of the deep red blood, and his head is also upside down. The Goblin main theme starts up again, and the credits roll. The music reflects the fantastical element of New Argento, and the blood reflects the hyperviolence. Mark's world has been turned on its head, as the image shows, and so has Argento's. I'm the Italian Horror Guy, and this has been the Italian Horror Guy podcast.